Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Sarah.
Good morning.
And today we're joined by a special guest in this series of vlogs. We have Laura Buchan of Westgate Chambers in Brighton. Good morning, Laura.
Good morning.
Hello. You're joining us today as barrister counsel to give your input in terms of children's contact leading up to Christmas, which is obviously a big area when it comes to family law. And something which Sarah and I receive a lot of inquiries about. So I understand you're a family specialist, but you actually cover a broad range of areas.
Yes, so I do family law in terms of pretty much everything that encompasses. So children, we've got private law. I do a lot of occupation orders and non-molestation orders, which link in, and family finance as well. So when people are being divorced, what they need to look at in division of their assets.
Yeah. Because it's often the case when clients come to us, they might say, well, actually, I've got a divorce. And then there's all those other strands, and it's sort of breaking it down. And of course, it's all interrelated, isn't it, inevitably?
Absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes when you're in occupation order proceedings and there's something that you think, you're trying to bypass the financial remedy courts to try and make things a bit quicker. So it's quite handy to be able to pick up on that.
Yeah, brilliant. Lovely.
So in terms of specifically looking at contact at Christmas, obviously you and we have lots of clients who have difficulties in arranging contact anyway, but Christmas is a particularly emotive time of year, isn't it? Everybody wants to spend time with their children on Christmas Day. Where parents have separated, do you tend to find that there is a norm?
Yeah, I think if you're in a child arrangements agreement in terms of the general type of contact, so every other weekend and halving the school holidays, the courts tend to look at it from a point of view of, if we're halving the school holidays, the actual Christmas period, which I like to think is the 23rd through to the 28th or 29th. The view they tend to take is halving the rest of the holiday, and then that period is almost a standout period, and you half it down the middle, and it alternates each year, which I think is quite important for clients to remember.
Yes, yeah, and I think at the outset, if somebody was to find now that they didn't have arrangements in place, it can be, some people can say, well, I want this Christmas, but it's all about being fair, isn't it? And about communicating and accepting that whatever's in place this year probably is going to be reversed going forwards.
Absolutely. I think if you've had Christmas Day and Christmas Eve the previous year, I think it's about applying a emotion-free at what is obviously an emotional time for everybody, but trying to apply a common sense and logical approach to that, which is, you're both parents, you both have parental responsibility, and you both want to spend time with the children at that time of year, but unfortunately that's just not possible. So that logical mindset, I find, is really helpful, especially in a court setting.
Yes.
Absolutely. And also, of course, let's not forget, generally speaking, the children have 2 weeks holiday for Christmas. So in fact, that whole period is a block of Christmas time. As much as everybody does get naturally emotionally attached to the 2 main days, it's during that whole period of time. So in fact, it's flexibility for that period, and perhaps that first year thinking, I haven't actually got Christmas Day or Boxing Day, but I've got other days and it's still part of the Christmas season.
Absolutely. And as I say, when the courts look at it as Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, and then the other party gets Boxing Day and the day after Boxing Day. So as far as the children are concerned, they're getting 2 Christmases, aren't they?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I suppose it's more problematic where parents live further apart, because you do have, it's not like you can drop off at midday on Christmas Day so that both of you get to see the children on Christmas Day. But I think, like we've said, it's probably about discussion, isn't it? And I think as far as we see, the agreements are more likely to work where people understand why one person wants it to work one way. If they've had that open line of communication at the outset, then at least they understand why that somebody's asking for something, rather than thinking they're just being difficult.
Yeah, I think one of the things I have found since I first started practicing, the courts were minded to do that halving Christmas Day and hand over, so both parents got a part of Christmas Day. That was quite common, but now the mentality seems to be, and quite rightly, I think, in my opinion, is why should children, especially if they are living slightly further afield from one another, why should they be wasting their Christmas day in a car, traveling from one person to the other? And I think some of the things that clients need to remember is that contact is for the benefit of the children. And that is an example of how that arrangement would fly completely in the face of what's best for the children.
Yes, yeah. So in terms of, if we get to now and we have people coming in without anything in place for Christmas, obviously the starting point is going to be discuss it with the other person and try to negotiate or mediate an agreement, and then it will be followed by an application to the court, which is generally, I mean, we're getting close to that time where the court's not going to be able to do anything in advance of Christmas. And the court will be taking a sensible approach, won't they? Like you say, they're not going to have the time to consider the whole merits of this arrangement going forwards. It's going to be what's going to work for this Christmas. So if people can agree it between them, it is going to be better.
Absolutely.
And probably getting legal advice if they get stuck, so that both parties have some sensible advice to try to negotiate that agreement.
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. And I think it's legal advice and having that in the wings, so to speak, to go to, but also having realistic expectations as well, perhaps being kind to one another and not trying to do too much sometimes. And I think that relates back to what you were saying, Laura, about the sort of traditional version of contact from the judge being that you split Christmas Day, you split Boxing Day. And I think for some people it was all a bit frenetic, and perhaps trying too hard and trying to do too much, and maybe just sort of easing off a little bit and thinking, you know, what can I actually do sensibly and enjoy it? And so that the children enjoy it, and so they're not overly tired as well.
Absolutely. And that's why I tend to say to a lot of my clients is, let's look at it as a 6-day period, that one person gets 3 days, so the 23rd, 24th, 25th, and the other person gets, you know, the 3 days thereafter. And then we go back into the normal, you know, school holidays regime, which is the rest of that time is split. I think simplifying Christmas will just help the children, as you say, completely.
Yes, yeah. And so if we have applications before the court, in general children act proceedings, sometimes the children will have a voice and will be heard. Does that tend to happen? Do you find when you're before the court, Laura, that the children tend to have a voice in terms of what they want for Christmas?
No, because it's such a niche question for the court, and really if you're in a position where the child is spending time, there's no safeguarding concerns, the first question the judge is going to ask, what was the arrangements last year?
Yeah.
And as we say, the first thing they're thinking is whatever it was last year, we'll make the opposite of this year. Quite a simplistic way forward. You certainly wouldn't get CAFCAS involved on any form of wishes and feelings report just for Christmas.
No.
Oh, what about, Laura, what about travel costs? Because this always comes up with contact generally. So who's doing what and who's paying for what? And of course, we're against a quite a harsh economic background now, where people are going to be worried about what they're paying out on petrol. And that shouldn't be the primary concern, because, as you say, the needs of the children are paramount, and hopefully parents can work together, carers can work together and sort that out. But I mean, how does the court deal with that as an issue? The travel costs and who does what, who's collecting, who's dropping off?
I find that if the parents live quite a significant distance away from one another, then the court's rationale seems to be that a halfway point is appropriate, so that the children aren't doing a very, very long trip in one sitting, as such tends to be the starting point for that, which I suppose has the element of being fair to it as well, because each parent are doing their part and the driving and the associated costs with it, and it's sharing that cost. If families live slightly closer together, I've had a little bit of ups and downs depending on a case-by-case basis, really. I've had ones previously where you successfully run the argument of mother is primary carer, for example, she is paying out X, Y, and Z. Yes, there's child maintenance in there, but that only covers X amount, and of course the court don't have jurisdiction on child maintenance. So actually, if it's for the benefit of the father and the children having contact, and it's not a very long distance, then sometimes the court say it's the person who's having that contact as such. to be the person that meets that charge. If it's close contact, I think it also depends on the volatility of the parental relationship as well.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, yeah.
But that certainly is no stretch, other than unlike the long distance one where we can kind of say that's where the starting point is. I think travel, I think people need to be, again, logical and realistic that everybody's in the same boat. Halving the travel cost is probably the best starting point, come what may, but there are arguments one way or t'other for it as well.
Yes, yeah. And I guess another problematic area is where parents aren't having direct contact. So if contact has completely broken down with one of the parents and it's being built up through indirect contact, what tends to be the court's approach there?
I think if you're the primary carer and the position is we're building up indirect contact in the hope to get to direct contact, or even we don't agree to progress to direct, we're having, I don't know, a fact-finding hearing or something, but Christmas is in between. I had a case very recently where that was exactly the position. We were having a fact-finding in February. We needed to deal with what was happening with Christmas before then, and it was indirect only, letters. And I had a conversation with my client and she agreed that actually what would be a nice thing is for her to write a list of 5 or 6 items or little presents between £10 to £30 that child would actually want, because there's no point saying, right, he can send a Christmas or she can send a Christmas present and it be something that the child has no interest in, because arguably you're feeding into that form of separation between the non-resident parent and the child. So I'm very pro if you're at a stage of indirect contact and there aren't any form of safeguarding concerns in terms of addresses and things like that, that the non-resident parent does send a little gift and a little note, and I actually think that it's quite nice for the resident parent to video them opening it as well. Because again, that's showing the court, if you are coming in with that stance, which is, I'm not unreasonable, this needs to be at a child-focused pace, but here's a little bit of a goodwill gesture that is emotional at a very emotional time.
And I suppose that can help in the situations where sometimes children are against the idea. They're worried for some reason about having contact with one of their parents, but if they've got that, if they know that the parent they're not living with is thinking about them, has sent them a card, has sent them a small gift, it can be those small steps that actually make the child feel more comfortable in moving that forward themselves, can't it?
Absolutely. And I also think that by the resident parent being involved in undertaking a video of them unwrapping that's almost sending the child the emotional permission from that parent that it's okay to open this and enjoy this present as well. And I think that it's the small things like that which sometimes go quite a little way. I mean, on that particular case, when myself and my client did make that proposal, the father started crying of, you know, that would mean the world to me.
Well, I think generally as well, you've touched on presents. Talking about presents between the separated parents is really important, because otherwise the child could end up with just 2 sets of the same presents if they've told both parents they want the same thing.
Absolutely. If you are able to communicate, I think that's really important. And I also sometimes think that whilst money is not everything, children do pick up sometimes on disparity of presents and things, and I think having an open communication about that, if one carer earns significantly more, then having that open conversation and making sure that if that is picked up upon the child, that there's a joint narrative about that as well, because that can, I'm finding, cause a little bit of friction in relationships that actually aren't that problematic.
No. And I suppose that the final point is grandparents, because quite often grandparents will feel that they obviously want to see their grandchildren at Christmas, but feel that they have an automatic right to do that, and that adds another complication into situations where you're already struggling to come to an agreement about who's going to be where and when.
They don't have an automatic right.
No.
I think,
And I think the assumption generally with the courts is that if they're with dad, then they'll be with dad's parents in that period of time, isn't it? It's not, okay, they used to see grandma on Christmas Eve, so that needs to continue, and that's not an approach the court's going to take.
No, the view, especially as I said, there's no safeguarding concerns or issues, is what that parent does in that time and who they see, so long as, again, there's no issues that would impact safeguarding, is up to that parent. So if you, as you say, Christmas Eve had always been a traditional on the paternal side of the family, and they did a big thing every Christmas Eve, and the court does an alternating, then every other Christmas Eve they can do that, and every other Boxing Day they could do an equivalent of instead. But I think it's again an emotional time of year, but grandparents don't have automatic anything. And I think we could sit here and talk about the process of the permission stage if any grandparent did want to make any applications. But what I would say is I think that there would be very little prospect of success to do that if that was specifically looking at Christmas contact.
Yes.
Yeah. So it comes down to communication, doesn't it? As with all areas that we deal with, Sarah, it's about the communication, it's about the flexibility, and it's about probably planning as far ahead as you can on a practical basis. It's never too early to get Christmas sorted, is it?
No, and you know, from my perspective, when we're drafting orders, you know, we set it up forever, which is on these 2 years, this is what happens, and we rotate thereafter. So I think if you're not at a stage where you've got any form of order in place and you're just discussing having an agreement, a contact agreement plan, absolutely having that structure in writing is only going to help everybody have clarity.
Yes, yeah. And I think in addition to what you said, Jackie, it's just making sure the children are always at the forefront of the arrangements, that their interests are what dictates those arrangements, rather than personal feelings of wanting to see the child on Christmas Day.
That's right.
I mean, and the other thing I think is it depends on each family as well. I mean, I had a case that they always spent Christmas Eve with mum, and there was this big Santa stocking. When they open on Christmas Eve, they follow the trail of presents down to X, and that was just something mum had always done. And actually, in that particular case, Dad was saying, well, she can actually have Christmas Eve. The children enjoy that so much. It's not something that I'm really into. So she can just have Christmas Eve every year, and I'll just have the 28th every year or something. So I think, as you say, what the children like and enjoy and benefit from is important. Well, it's paramount.
Yes,
happiness, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's brilliant, and hopefully is helpful to people who are trying to make those arrangements for this Christmas and those going forwards. And if it's a struggle for this Christmas, knowing that actually there's time to resolve it for going forwards.
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, open communication, plan ahead. And if you think that there are going to be issues around Christmas, then I think you need to be getting your legal advice in as soon as possible, because the delay in the court proceedings and listings. The one thing I would say is, if you were to put in an application just to look at Christmas contact, you're probably going to go towards the bottom of the pile in terms of seriousness and necessity of listing, unless it's a form of urgent issue that needs to be dealt with in the perspective of urgent, not because Christmas is around the corner, but urgent because of safeguarding or anything. Yes,
as you say, Christmas is not usually looked at in isolation. It's usually part of a bigger contact arrangement, child arrangements order. So. Okay, well, that's brilliant. Thank you very much for joining us, Laura. And
thank you, Laura,
for having me.
And have a lovely Christmas. It's just around the corner.
Absolutely. Have a great Christmas. Take care.
You too. Take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.